The film opens with an orchestra crew is getting ready for rehearsals at the German National Opera in Hamburg, Germany. Since the crew is unaware, they begin to disperse even though some armed gangsters are approaching them. They also start the rehearsals as soon as their conductor shows up. However, the criminals soon show them to start shooting. John provides the last instructions to the rescue crew as they arrive. John tells everyone to wait for his orders before shooting as the criminals declare on a live feed that they have taken over and demand a $300 million ransom. However, once the mob leader drags out one woman and murders her, Matteo disobeys John's orders and opens fire on the criminals. Having no other option, John orders the other tactical units to begin fire and kill the criminals. This leads to a battle in which John's tactical units demonstrate their skill and defeat the majority of the gangsters. Following a brief period of agitated gunfire, John accuses Matteo of disobeying his commands. However, it appears that John is shot and was not in good health. One of the thugs who had been posing as a captive suddenly rises, and Matteo dispatches him. Unfortunately, John is shot dead. Even though Matteo is a former Special Force member and works at a sawmill in Romania 5 years later, his life appears to be terrible in light of John's ordeal. We are reminded of the enjoyable moments he shared with John's family when he received a picture. He books a ticket to Bucharest and sits in a vehicle to go after announcing his retirement on payday. On the other hand, the Interpol squad under Agent Shira has aided mafias from several mafia factions in Amsterdam and stopped a heroin shipment. As one thug informs Shaban, the mob boss, that Interpol has seized their package, they beat one of them and haul him away. Shira tells him that he needs to put in more effort because they need to arrest the mob bosses, and it turns out that one of the prisoners is an undercover Interpol agent who assisted in the seizure of this cocaine shipment. Paul, a cryptocurrency trader, is introduced to us as Matteo has landed in Amsterdam. He tells his client over the phone that everything is fine, but when he sits down to monitor his cryptographs on the computer, things don't seem to be going so well. Matteo discovers his daughter Angie at John's house. He urges her to contact her mother Helen, who is astonished to see him and invites him in for coffee. Inside, Matteo finds out that Helen is now married to Paul and accuses him of being absent from John's funeral, even though he was like a brother to him. Helen doesn't accept Matteo's apology that he was to blame for John's death since she had already moved on and didn't want to be reminded of it. Helen calls Matteo back to stay for a while after he leaves. When Shaban and his chef disagree about the food he makes, which doesn't draw customers to his restaurant, Helen tells Matteo that he may use some of John's leftovers if he wants to, and that it's nice to see him after a long absence. However, Shaban and his men are aware that they have a mole inside of them. Helen tells Paul that Matteo was John's friend and will be staying for a while when he sees him at home with Angie. After supper, Matteo sits outside and reminisces about his time with John in Afghanistan during their assignment, discussing their families and John telling him that Helen was expecting a child. Before going to bed, Angie tells her mother that she admired Matteo. Paul then approaches Matteo for a brief conversation, during which he tells him that there's always something to fight for. Helen tells Paul that since they have experienced a lot together with John, he should not worry about Matteo. Matteo goes out to jog in the morning after discovering a message from Angie requesting that he not leave without saying goodbye. He discovers Helen and Angie heading off to school on his way back, and she asks him to watch her dog at work. Shaban pays Paul a visit and asks about the 15 million euros that are missing from the account. Paul tries to tell him that there is a small issue with the cryptocurrency market, but it will be resolved shortly. As Shaban tells him that he only has one day and shows him a picture of his family, he asks for one day. They are being followed by the Interpol undercover agent when they are outside, but as he enters the building, it is discovered that they are also following him. Before Helen invites him out, Matteo, bored with his life, tries his hand at carpentry. He enjoys spending time with them, especially Angie. Concerned, Paul comes home in pieces, and when Helen questions him about it, he merely tells her that he needs to figure out some account figures without telling her the truth about Shaban. A dead body hanging from a bridge startles some visitors who are on their excursion, while Matteo continues his exercises. It is also known that Shaban's men killed him after discovering he was the Interpol mole. Matteo remains at home to carry on with his carpentry work, while Shira and her companion arrive at the site. A drop in cryptocurrencies is announced on the news, and Paul gets a call from Shaban requesting his money after he was only given one day. Shaban dispatches his men to resolve the matter, but Paul assures him that he will fix it. When Helen sees Angie teasing Matteo about his scars and then giving him a tight hug, Shira and her partner realize that the criminals were trying to tell them something. Paul contacts Helen to let her know that he has some business to attend to and won't be able to come over. Additionally, Angie shows Matteo a sketch when they are out for pizza, and Helen begs him to stay a little while longer for Angie's benefit. Angie sees it and rushes back to stop the thugs who have just arrived and are chasing the bud. She is abducted when Matteo protects her from a blow, and Matteo is struck down in the process. However, after Helen tells Paul about the kidnapping, he calls Shaban to beg, but he simply hangs up. Matteo continues the pursuit, and soon after, he leaps on top of one of the vehicles and begins to battle them. This leads to a collision with another vehicle, which causes Matteo to fall on the other vehicle and recall, while still with John, how they are a family. As Shira presents herself to Helen and Paul, Matteo awakens at a hospital, although in handcuffs. Matteo, however, moves out soon. After they let him go, Shira asks him what he plans to do next, and he tells her that he is going to save Angie. According to their investigation, Angie's kidnapping is personal, and she tells him about Shaban and the other groups involved. However, Paul remains mute when they question him and Helen if they know anything about it. After giving Matteo her business card, Shira and her partner attempt to determine how Shaban is related to the kidnapping after the others have left. All of this is noticed by one of Shaban's men. Now held captive at Shaban's club, Angie learns that Matteo has left the hospital. However, Matteo remembers when John asked him to be Angie's godfather while clutching a sketch that Angie gave him. To go for a rescue, he pulls out a few things. Matteo discovers that Paul is aware of something when Paul unintentionally reveals Shaban's affiliation with the gangs when he comes to warn him. And when he confronts him, he admits that he owes Shaban 15 million euros. After Matteo seizes John's firearms, he gives Paul instructions to phone Shaban and pretend to have the money, which he does, and they decide to exchange Angie for him. Shaban accepts the arrangement and gives him instructions to bring the funds to a building site. Interpol has discovered that Paul is aware of something, while Matteo assures Helen that he will bring Angie back. Matteo ambushes Shira's colleague and takes his car, but Helen invites him in for coffee. He phones Paul to have a conversation, but Paul becomes terrified when he realizes he is from Interpol. Upon arriving at the construction site for the exchange, Matteo runs into some of the gangsters and asks for Angie. To his surprise, they inform him that they don't have her because the only thing that was agreed upon was to deliver the money so that Angie wouldn't be hurt. When the team leader goes to inspect his bag after they have taken it with force, it is discovered to be a bomb, which detonates to strike some criminals before Matteo strikes the others. At home, Helen is taken by one of Shaban's men, who fights with the Interpol agent after dragging the surviving commander for questioning. The thug repeatedly cuts him with a blade after a brief altercation, and Helen is the only one who fires to frighten him away. Matteo ties up the criminal he arrested and tortures him to find out where Angie is, but he initially demands before he breaks down and reveals the location, so Paul prepares to leave. Helen tends to the injured Interpol agent, but when he requests Paul's help, he grudgingly disregards them and leaves to go to his car. However, one of Shaban's men was waiting and kills him. As the mobster departs, Shira arrives and reassures his companion that he will be awarded a medallion for his valor. Matteo goes to the rescue and tells Shira to fetch assistance. Even though Shaban is anxious after not receiving word from his troops, he sits down with Angie and asks her whether Matteo will come to her aid. She responds that he will. Matteo has reached the club and confronts the bodyguards as they attempt to prevent him from climbing up. The conflict becomes violent inside when Shira also shows up and begins shooting out several gangsters. Shaban makes the decision to flee as Shira and Matteo finish the men inside while they are cleaning the property together. Although Shaban orders his men to remain behind, he continues to run with Angie, and when Matteo and Shira spot them, a 2-on-2 brawl breaks out. The battle goes on. Music, Matteo chooses to go alone for Shaban, and when he encounters Shaban with Angie, Shaban threatens to shoot Angie to death if he approaches. Angie goes to see how Matteo is doing when he unexpectedly throws a blade into Shaban's heart, even though he also shoots him. Fortunately, Matteo lives. 6 months later, Matteo is once more by himself on a boat cruising the waterways, and Angie and Helen are wondering if Matteo will ever return. The film concludes with Shira showing up to inform her partner that they still have work to do while he is receiving his Medal of Honor in the hospital.